Rayman Raving Rabbits got pretty decent reviews and sold well, so it was only natural that a sequel would be made. It turns out many sequels would be made, turning the Rabbids into its own successful separate game series. Now, I haven't played all of them, but it seems that they were okay, with some of them improving on the first one, and some of them being pointless and stupid. Unfortunately for the world of gaming, the Rabbids franchise actually took over the Rayman franchise, meaning it would take a while before Ubisoft would release a new main series Rayman game. They took a step in the right direction in between Rayman 3 and Raving Rabbits, but it took 5 years for the new Rayman game to come out after Raving Rabbits. Also, they were supposed to be making Beyond Good and Evil 2 in that time as well, but all we got were Rabbids games. You can probably see why a lot of people hate the Rabbids franchise. I actually forgot about Rayman for a long time, as I assumed they just weren't going to make any more. But then a ray of hope appeared. On the 14th of June 2010, Ubisoft announced Rayman Origins, a 2D platformer which was supposed to be released in separate downloadable episodes. It wasn't the full sequel I wanted, but hell, it was more Rayman finally. During development, they decided to make it a full retail game and release Rayman Origins on the 25th of November 2011. In Europe anyway. And I got myself a copy on the 360. So could Rayman Origins right the wrong of the 5-year wait for the new Rayman game, or does it make Rabbids Alive and Kicking look like a masterpiece? Let's see. The game starts off with Rayman, Glowbox, a couple of Tinsies and a new character called the Bubble Dreamer lying around sleeping, similar to how Rayman 3 started. Their musical snores disturb some old woman in the land of the living dead who sends her minions to capture them. Rayman instantly escapes, starting off the adventure. While it doesn't really set up any kind of story, it is an entertaining cutscene, and it's good to see that silly Rayman charm back. The story is the main problem with this game though. It's called Rayman Origins and originally showed that Bratella the Fairy made Rayman and showed a younger Rayman. However, when they made this a full game, they decided to make the story a sequel to the original Rayman set before Rayman 2. I think. It's a 2D platformer, so of course the story isn't really important, but the more you think about the story, the more confusing it gets. It's called Rayman Origins, and the opening cutscene shows the creatures of the land of the living dead as the enemies. That's fine, but then there's also a twist at the end showing that the magician Tinsy that pops up from time to time was actually in love with Mr. Dark from the first game, and after you stop him, you beat the game. Okay, but there's also the secret final boss that's in the land of the living dead that also counts as the end of the game. The manual only mentions the land of the living dead as part of the story, so why was one of the final bosses a Tinsy who's just in love with Mr. Dark? Even if you take out the magician Tinsy, you still would have a hard time justifying the name Rayman Origins, as Rayman's actual origins was cut from the game and is only detailed in the manual. Also, Glowbox wasn't in Rayman 1, but it's in this game, so that also kind of messes things up. It's just weird that this game could be set before Rayman 1, but it's probably set afterwards. Most people probably won't care or notice about this, but it's just strange how all over the place the basic storyline is. Rayman Origins goes back to being a 2D platformer and plays a lot like Rayman 1. The main changes to the core gameplay though have been that the camera has been zoomed out and the game has a much faster pace to it. Even though the health has been changed, so instead of having points of health you die in one hit unless you collect a heart giving you an extra hit. Despite this change, Rayman Origins is actually a lot easier than Rayman 1, thank God. This game is definitely challenging in its own right, but it doesn't limit itself to the retro traditions that plague so many older games. The levels are hard but remain enjoyable as each level is split into sections, and whenever you die you instantly spawn at the beginning at each one of these sections. There's no lives or game overs, so your progress in a level doesn't get erased if you mess up too many times like in Rayman 1 and other old platformers. You still have to master the controls, figure out effective ways to get through levels and memorize enemies and platform locations, but it's so much more enjoyable than 99% of any platformer made before 1996, as the challenge isn't about endurance, it's just about being smart and having good reflexes. You tackle each obstacle as it comes, you learn from your mistakes, and it's satisfying to play and beat. There's also the challenge in getting 100% as yellow lumps and cages return once again. Although it doesn't really make sense that you collect yellow lumps, as in Rayman 2 the yellow lumps were broken segments of the heart of the world. The space pirates were the one that broke it, so did somebody break the heart of the world again? Or okay, I'll start pointing out the inconsistencies. You'll be collecting as much as you were in Rayman 3, as lums are everywhere, and you have to get 300 to free all the Electoons. There are hidden coins throughout levels which are worth 25 lums each to help you out. The cages in this game work a bit differently too, as each level has 3 to find, with one always being at the end of the level. The other 2 are in separate areas, with their entrance being hidden in the levels. None of them are too hard to find though, and the majority are simply a case of having a bit of a look around in levels. Once you find them, you have to defeat all the enemies and bust open the cage. Each one is different and creative, so it's worth tracking down the cages just to see what they throw at you next. Like in Rayman 1, Rayman actually starts out being able to do very little. He can walk, run, jump and grab on ledges, and that's about it. Throughout the game you unlock attack, hover, swim underwater, shrink and run on walls. This game overall controls great, and of course there can be frustration with the controls in later levels, but that's the nature of a hard 2D platformer. You're always going to blame the controls at some point. However, I do have some legitimate complaints about the controls. You don't unlock hover until the beginning of the second world, so you have to play through the whole of the first world without it, which can be odd, especially when it's your second time playing through the game. Also, there's an ice world, and running on the ice can feel weird, leading to a lot of missed alarms and deaths. Overall though, the controls are fluid and work well. Being a 2D platformer, it's hard to have as much variety in the gameplay as a 3D one. However, the core gameplay works so well that you'll never really notice. Also, they combat this by featuring chases. This means Rayman chasing after someone or something chasing down Rayman. These chases forces you to have quick reflexes as you constantly have to run. I really enjoy the chases in this game, and they really show off how good the level design is and how tight the controls are. The chases that separate the men from the less manly men are the treasure chest chases. You have to beat all 10 to gain access to the true final level, and they are the hardest part of the game. You will drive yourself insane when you first attempt one of these, but the feeling of satisfaction of catching that chest in the end is unmatched in most modern games. As well as platforming, the mosquito levels return from Rayman 1 in full force. These levels play like an old shooter where you can shoot enemies with whatever gross thing the mosquitoes are firing out. You can also suck in enemies and shoot them back out. These levels get so crazy later on with projectiles flying everywhere, but they're all fun to play. It's also pretty cool that the boss fights in the first half of the game are all in mosquito levels, although they are pretty easy. The bosses in the second half though is where they get really interesting. They come down to memorizing their patterns to beat them, and they're all pretty difficult. Their designs are all weird and wonderful and match the Rayman style. Actually, how have I got far in this review without talking about the graphics? Ubisoft made a new game engine called UbiArt, which allows them to take their crazy designs and make a game out of them, and it looks amazing. The design of the characters, the levels, the enemies, they're just so creative and simply great to look at. How everything moves and is animated give this game its own character, from how mental Rayman looks when he runs to how ridiculous Globot looks when he crouches. I would have to say that it's kind of disappointing that they pick generic themes for their worlds: Grass World, Sand World, Fire Ice World and Water World. Still, each have their own touches that separate them from the norm, like the food theme in the Lava World and the music theme in the Sand World. One thing that's odd about the game's structure is that you have to go through the 4 worlds, but then once you beat those, 4 more worlds unlock which have the exact same themes. They're different and they're more challenging levels and are still fun to play, but it felt very unnecessary that they had to split the game in 2 like this. Like the story though, it seems that the game is structured like this because they moved the game from episodes to 1 full game. Still, it doesn't really get in the way of anything, so no harm done. The feeling of this game is definitely helped out by a great soundtrack which mixes quirky sounds with more traditional instruments, which along with the great graphics create a weird and wonderful feeling to this game. Rayman Origins features drop-in drop-out local co-op, and the game is just as fun with friends. It's always fun to try and beat the harder parts of this game with friends, as it's awesome when you finally beat it, and it's hilarious when someone dies in an embarrassing way. When a friend dies, they turn into a balloon which other people must pop in order to bring them back. It's similar to New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but the co-op overall is better as you can't run into each other. You can hit each other if you want to mess around, but when it comes to the platforming, the other players don't get in the way. This generation has seen a lot of old franchise getting a new semi-retro sequel, but Rayman Origins is definitely the best of them. It remembers that it's not just about nostalgia. A good game needs to be well made and creative in its own way to be enjoyable. It takes the best part of modern game design and the best parts of old school game design to make something brilliant. As a 2D platformer, it's definitely one of the best of all time, combining the obstacle course-like design of Mario, the collecting aspect of Yoshi's Island, and the weird charm of Rayman 1 seamlessly. Sadly, this game sold poorly, with only 50,000 copies sold in its first month of release. Guess how many copies of New Super Mario Bros. Wii have been sold? 26 million. This number is insane, as Rayman Origins is so much better than that game. I have a couple of problems with Rayman Origins, but overall it's incredible. If you missed out on it, then we can't be friends. It's dirt cheap now, so you have no excuse to play it. My score is 9.5 out of 10. I have my nitpicks, but none of them turn me off the smartly made imaginative gameplay experience that is Rayman Origins. So thank you everyone for checking out my month of Rayman reviews. I'm glad there's people out there who agree that Rayman is as awesome as I think he is, and stay tuned for Rayman Legends, as when that game finally comes out, I'm gonna be all over it.